everyone. I'm Samyukta. I'm an advocate with the International Dark Sky Association. I was born and raised in Kenya, and I'm originally from Kenya, but I currently live and work in Slovenia. And I'm really interested in exploring astronomy from various different perspectives and darkness and the night sky from different perspectives. And I'd like to thank Rayan from Cosmic Tribe for inviting me today to talk to you during International Dark Sky Week. Today, I really want to explore this idea of darkness and why we use light at night, and hopefully try to uncover some of the things in our culture and our nature that kind of keep us using artificial lighting, and just to question how we perceive the dark. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I want you to think about the word darkness and just think about what comes to your mind, what your initial thoughts and impressions of this word are. Probably for most of you, one of the main things that you associate with the dark is the nighttime. Maybe you associate it to symbols like the moon or the stars or other things in the night. But also maybe some other things come up for you, some more ambiguous things like mystery or fear. So I want to ask you why you think we feel the need to use light at night. It's probably because we're trying to avoid something, right? And this avoidance of anything, is usually rooted in fear. So probably the biggest psychological reason that we use artificial lights at night is that we're afraid of the dark. This fear, it exists in many levels and it's perpetuated on many levels. So with this presentation, I want to try and just explore it and try and dip my toes in it and just try to understand it a bit better and maybe paint a clearer picture for all of you listening. So the fear of the nighttime has lots of words. The mild form of the fear of the dark is called scotophobia or lygophobia. I think that's how you pronounce it. And an extreme form of the fear of the dark is called nyctophobia, which essentially means fear of the night. So fear of the dark is very common among children, but it's also pretty common in adults. I tried to look it up for adults and I got pretty varying statistics. Somewhere between 11 and 64% of adults are afraid of the dark. So most people outgrow this fear that they have from childhood, but it does tend to persist in some adults. Exploring this fear through biology, the fear of the dark is usually triggered by our brain's exaggerated perspective of what could or would happen in a dark environment. So it's not necessarily the dark itself. It's about something else that exists within the darkness. And there's a strong evolutionary possibility that our fear of the dark was intended to protect us from nocturnal predators or predators that hunt at night. So by staying inside when it was dark outside, especially thousands of years ago when we didn't really have the means to illuminate the night, we were much better off staying in to keep ourselves safe. This is because human beings are diurnal creatures. So we're active during the day rather than at nighttime. And we also rely very heavily on our visual senses. Our eyes are very well adapted to seeing daylight and sunlight, but they don't do so well at night, especially in very dim moonlight or during new moons, and not being able to see as well as you're used to seeing during the daytime. This leads to a feeling of fear. And this fear tends to be heightened when you're in new environments with unfamiliar stimuli. So if you're at home in the dark and you're used to the noises that usually happen, you're likely to be less afraid than if you were somewhere else, if you were outside or just in a different environment than you're used to, and you don't have your visual senses to rely on. Now, culture also plays a huge role in our fear of the dark. And this is because darkness is usually used as a metaphor for other things. So it's possible that our fear is innate because we have plenty of biological reasons to be afraid, but culture really builds on this. And the duality of dark and light, it recurs commonly across various ancient cultures and also in current ones. For example, the Genesis creation narrative states that God separated light from the darkness. The Bible also associates light with good, truth, and virtue. And this implies that darkness is the opposite of these qualities, that darkness is bad or dishonest or not virtuous in some way. This duality of dark and light also shows up in other mythologies. For example, the goddess Ushas from Hindu Vedic mythology. She's also said to chase away oppressive darkness and evil demons. And I think it's pretty clear that these kinds of cultural statements tend to frame darkness in a very negative way. At some point, light and dark got conflated with good and bad, where light became good and dark became bad. So I imagine that the chain of reasoning went like, light makes us feel safer, and so light is good for us. And then we kind of extrapolated this good for us as to light is good in general. And naturally, we would extend the same, like the opposite sentiments to the darkness, where the dark makes us feel less safe. And so dark is bad for us because of how it makes us feel. And then dark is just bad in general. And we're extrapolating and making these blanket statements based on how things make us feel. But maybe our feelings are only a part of this equation. But not all cultures propose such an extreme duality between dark and light. Some cultures have a much more balanced perspective that dark and light or day and night are balanced and that none is morally superior to the other. So you probably recognize this symbol of yin and yang. It comes from ancient Chinese philosophy, which suggests that dark and light are not actually opposing, but they're complementary forces that interact with each other and balance each other out, and that both of them are necessary. And I think we have a lot to learn from this. Current culture also reinforces these perceptions of dark and light, or these kind of blanket statements and these associations and conflations of dark and light with bad and good. I found a bunch of quotes, and I'm sure this is just scraping the surface. These are just a few of some that you've probably seen many of them about the goodness and virtue of light and driving out darkness and just using light as a metaphor for all things that are good and pure, and darkness is something that needs to be driven away or chased away or just filled up with light. Of course, from all the people here who have done great work, I'm not questioning any of their work or their message. I just want to try and make you aware of the fact that darkness is often used as a placeholder for bad. And these things are so embedded in our language that we don't even think twice about reading these quotes. It's obvious when you read this what the desirable outcome is or what the person is implying. And I just want you to maybe think about the language that you're consuming or you're using and recognize that in this case, you're reading metaphors, you're not reading reality. And of course, these quotes are beautiful, but I would like for people to think of these like poetry as being suggestive rather than literal, but also to contemplate how it frames what you think about darkness and how you look at darkness, and maybe bring to the surface some of the subconscious perceptions that you have. So just to summarize, I want to make it clear that darkness and light have nothing to do with morality. Light is not inherently good, and dark is also not inherently bad. It's just the way that we're predisposed to think about them and how these predispositions are culturally reinforced. So media is also a part of the culture, but I want to treat it separately. The obvious example when you think about the use of darkness or nighttime in the media is horror movies. So usually everything bad happens at night, which frames nighttime in a very negative light. But a more subtle thing that horror movies do to elicit fear is to not show people the scary thing. It usually lurks in the shadows, it comes out at night, and our imaginations are left to do the work. And this plays on our fear of the unknown. But our fear of the unknown is separate from our fear of the dark. And when they get conflated together like this, it really complicates our relationship to darkness. Another way that like light and darkness show up in media are films with very clear good and bad tropes. And these quite often tend to use dark as a metaphor for bad again. So villains are typically associated with the underworld or the dark side. And sometimes they're also dressed in darker colors. And there's also a lot of symbolism in these movies. It's like light as a beacon of good and dark for bad, and illuminating the darkness as kind of a visual metaphor for replacing evil with good. So there might be a biological basis to our fear of the dark, but it's often heavily reinforced through cultural influences, specifically through the use of darkness as a placeholder for negative things and for bad or evil. But the important thing to note is that it's not the dark itself that we're afraid of. Often it's what the dark contains or what it represents, which is the unknown. And I want us all to recognize that we often make this leap because of these metaphors or these conflations of darkness and evil that are sometimes innate, and maybe we have some biological reasons to feel the way we do in the dark, but quite often these metaphors are culturally induced, and our frame of thinking and our perception of the dark is culturally induced. Okay, so we've reached this point and established that whether it's through biology or through culture, many of us are afraid of the dark, and many of us do have negative perceptions of it. But does that mean that it's okay to light everything up at night? The short answer is no. A slightly longer answer is that light at night affects our health really badly. It's been linked to different types of cancer, obesity, diabetes, mood disorders, and a whole host of other terrible mental and physical effects. Light at night also affects the health of so much other life, all of the ecosystems. The whole world has evolved in connection to these cycles of day and night. And light is a really powerful biological cue for humans and for many, many other organisms in the ecosystem, probably all of them. I also look at artificial light at night as a form of habitat loss. Nighttime is essentially a habitat that houses all these nocturnal animals and plants, and they need the nighttime to survive and to thrive and to be active. And by increasing our daytime with artificial lighting, we're really doing them a disservice. And it's just a form of habitat loss that's not really talked about because it seems benign. The solution to light pollution is very simple. It's to use less light, only light up environments that it's really necessary to, and only for the duration that is necessary. Using more natural forms of light is also greatly beneficial. Things like firelight and candlelight, these types of lights have been around for millennia, and our bodies know what to do with this light, and it's not harmful to us in the same way that our LEDs and artificial light are. So in case there is a need to use light, it's in many cases, it's much better to default to more natural forms of light. If you've decided that you still want light at night, then you can always use better lighting. The International Dark Sky Association has guidelines on how to structure and choose your lighting so that it does the least amount of damage to people and to the environment. So I encourage you to take a look at their website. And I've reached the end of my presentation. I really hope this encourages you to reflect on your relationship to darkness and to the nighttime. And I urge you to take a step towards restoring the natural darkness that's so necessary for people and for the environment. And I want to wish you all a happy International Dark Sky Week.